Welcome back to the Warrior Servant Leader podcast. We're so happy you're joining us today. We have a fascinating guest, Dr. Matt Kutz, Ph.D. in global leadership. He's an award-winning author, award-winning educator, researcher, and speaker. But Matt will tell you the most thing that he's most excited about is being a husband, a dad, and a grandpa. And in his spare time, which he doesn't have a lot of because this dude travels all over the world, is insanely passionate about helping people gain perspective and overcome the adversity and uncertainty that life brings. He does this through helping people, helping others to develop an epic mindset and practice contextual intelligence and 3D thinking. Check him out on his website, Dr. Matt Kutz, Kutz.com. And Matt, welcome to the show. We're so glad you're here and that you're not buried up to your butt in snow in Ohio with that storm that just came through.
It did. Thanks, Pat. Yeah, my wife and I matter of fact, I'm looking at the video. My hair's a little ruffled because I took my stocking cap off. We just shoveled the driveway, and that was a two-person job for sure.
Oh, man. We do not miss that Ohio. We were there for 36 years, and I'm telling you, I feel sorry for you having to put up and being close, not that far from the lake. You get the lake effect crap and everything else. Yeah. So, hey, it's exciting to have you here, a fellow, although I gotta. Oh, we might as well start a fight. So, are you a Michigan fan or Ohio State?
I'm a Buckeye fan. All the way.
Okay, all right. Then there's no argument there, man. So yeah, we got OH. Go Bucks. All right. So, what is contextual intelligence and 3D thinking? What's that all about?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So, let me start with a little history, actually, and it started back. Several years ago, I was teaching an adult Sunday school class at the church that we attended when my wife and I lived down in Florida. And I was teaching on the tribe of Issachar and the sons of Issachar and what they were able to do during the transition from Saul's kingdom to David's kingdom. And one of the things the scriptures say is that that tribe was, they brought discernment of the times to know what Israel ought to do. And I was teaching that class, and I was working on finishing up my dissertation at the exact same time. And one of the students in that class asked me, "Well, tell me what that means? Give me kind of the layman's term of understood the times and knew what to do." And I just said the phrase, "Well, it's kind of like a contextual intelligence. They understood the context, the environment that they were in, and then they were able to apply the correct behavior in that context." And that was the intelligence part. And so from that, now the interesting part about that is I said the phrase contextual intelligence, and it kind of immediately resonated with everybody in the room. They understood it with that language. Now, what's interesting is I was just finishing up my dissertation, and I had 12 leadership behaviors that didn't fit in the normal constructs of leadership behavior. And I was having a real hard time with my chair, my committee, trying to figure out, well, what do we do with these behaviors? Because I had 48 overall, but these 12 behaviors were the oddball behaviors that didn't fit in the normal leadership stuff like empathy and communication and things like that. And I said, so I went back and I said, you know what, I'm going to call this group, instead of trying to pick apart these 12, because the research factored them together. So it would have been, so the wise thing to do was to keep them together, but we were really struggling on if we should separate them out and just put them in other places. And I said, I'm going to call these 12 behaviors contextual intelligence, and kind of make the bold claim that this is a new facet of leadership that really hasn't been discovered yet or talked about much in the existing research. And so I did that, and it worked out well for me because it is shown to be valid, reliable. It's been validated in several different industries around the world. And now we have a profile that assesses it and all that. But what contextual intelligence is exactly what the tribe of Issachar used it for, to understand the times and know what to do. So that's really what it is in a nutshell. It's the capability, it's the skill set to be able to recognize your environment and discern what's actually happening in real time, and then know the appropriate thing to do based on what you're seeing in your environment right now. And of course, that's significant in a time like living in now, with all the uncertainty, all the complexity, all the different, not that life is more that now than it was before. I think we're more aware of it now.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I change environments and I go to a different place, a different country, work in a different industry, whatever, what skill sets do I take with me to be successful in that new context? And that's what contextual intelligence is. And I was able to identify 12 specific behaviors that contextually intelligent people do more frequently than other people. And so we've got these 12 behaviors. Now, that's a lot of behaviors, and you can't go around talking about these 12 things. So I simplified it, and I did some more rounds of research and other things, and was able to what's called a factor analysis. Was able to factor those 12 behaviors into 3 primary groups. This is what 3D thinking is. So the 3D that we talk about is not, words with 3Ds. It's actually 3 dimensions, and it's the 3 dimensions of time. So it's past, present, and future. And when you look at those 12 behaviors, 4 of the behaviors are very hindsight dominant behaviors. 4 of them are insight dominant behaviors, and 4 of them are foresight dominant behaviors. So 3D thinking then is the proper integration of all 3 time orientations in how we evaluate opportunities, make decisions, and navigate our complex environments. And what's really interesting about that, so that's hindsight, insight, and foresight. Those are the 3Ds, and for the 3 dimensions of time. And through the research and through conversations and a lot of other trainings and things that we've done now, and I've actually wrote a book on it called Contextual Intelligence. And what we have found is these 3 dimensions of time really carry some significant weight. And what I mean by that is when we could get people to realize during their decision-making process, during their leadership process, during their evaluating an opportunity or whatever it might be, if they take time to properly, and that's a big key phrase there, or a key word there, properly evaluate their hindsight, which is the past. What happened last time? How did it work? And we like to use hindsight over the past because hindsight implies how I interpret the past. It's my hindsight. So I've got to be very careful with how I use my hindsight. I have to be very careful with how I use my insight, which is right here in this moment. What am I seeing in front of my eyes or feeling right now in this immediate present moment? And then foresight, which is where do I think this would take me if I say this phrase, if I react this way, if I make this decision, where will it take me in the future? So we call that our aspirational thinking, our aspirational identity. And so these 3 time orientations become critical to seeing the whole picture. Or let me rephrase that, because that's overstating it a bit. Becomes critical in seeing a much bigger picture. And when we see a bigger picture, we have more data to pull from, we have more experiences to use, and we, generally speaking, make a better decision if we use these 3 time orientations than if we don't, or if we only use, for example, hindsight, which is what most people do. Statistically speaking, most people overemphasize their hindsight to the detriment of insight and foresight. So they only end up thinking, well, what happened last time? And they don't really think about, well, what conditions are different today, right now, than last time, and where might this take me in the future that it wouldn't have before, based on the different parameters that are in play now, especially if time has passed. Because, I don't know about you, but I'm 33 years removed from being 20. And so when I was 20, I was different than I am now. Yeah. And so maybe trying something now would work when it wouldn't have worked when I was 20, or vice versa. And so that's why time orientation and 3D thinking is really, really important.
Wow. it sounds like almost a really drilling down into Sun Tzu and the Art of War, and knowing the weather, the terrain, what was it? The weather, the way, terrain, and the leadership to be able to coordinate all that and have the right people in the right places at the right time, and a very in depth. While at the same time, because I just had a guest on recently. It wasn't Chris Voss, but we got talking about Chris Voss and the art of negotiation, and how Chris has identified was it safety, security, prosperity, and control are kind of the four fundamental big needs
Yeah.
that we have, and then our behaviors will correspond to our perceptions, our past, our present, and our future of what are we, how is our safety, our security, our prosperity, or our control been impacted, and what do I want to protect or to guide me, through the current circumstances.
Right. So that's the contextual intelligence part of it, because what most people do is they make those decisions or reactions not knowing I'm trying to protect my comfort, or I'm trying to, or control, kind of a thing. And that's what contextual intelligence helps us with. A big part of it is, and we, of course, in sociology and psychology, use a big fancy word, metacognition. And that's just, thinking about your thinking. And so often we don't think about why we're doing what we're doing, why we're reacting, how we're reacting. And that's very important for us, so that we can understand ourselves better, so others can understand us. And the 3D thinking process helps us with that. Okay, why am I doing this? Based on what past experience, that was this beneficial? Did this not? Am I avoiding this because last time it didn't work out? Where's hindsight and then insight? What is actually happening right now that's causing me to feel this way or think these thoughts? It really makes us become aware. And then how might this affect who I become later on down the road if I do or don't do a certain thing? But I need to know that it's predicated on I'm feeling frustrated about my control right now, and that's what triggers this. And that's really, really important part of the CI process.
Yeah, well, and not only understanding ourselves that if you're in a leadership position, whether it's by default, because you don't. It's not about like in the military and in law enforcement. It's not about the bars, stars, and stripes that you have. That's positional leadership. So people follow you because they have to,
Right.
because you've got that authority. But if you also have this contextual intelligence and 3D thinking in looking at other people's behavior, it'll help you better understand why they're doing what they're doing, so that you can, if you're trying to bring about, that you hear it all the time, at least in law enforcement, and I'm sure in the corporate world as well, is the culture of your organization is toxic, or the culture of your organization needs to be better, and people don't understand how to change culture because they can't even define it.
Right.
And that's what, and even in our own personal lives, that what is it? It's kind of linear. Everything begins with the thought. We average about 50,000 thoughts a day by some research, and 80% of them are negative. So, what are you thinking? And then, what you think and how you think creates attitudes, which is nothing more than a settled way of thinking. Attitudes are displayed in behaviors. Remember when, your mom or dad goes, "I don't like your attitude." Well, they're not reading your mind; they're seeing your behavior.
Exactly right.
And then those repeated behaviors become your habits, and then the habits become your culture. What is expected and accepted way of thinking, talking, and acting? But using what you're talking about with your contextual intelligence and that three-dimensional, because you're so spot on about we always get, well, this is the way we've always done it,
Right.
response to change. And that's living in the past, and we're in the present, and we're, because of that past trap, we're not able to even really successfully envision the future. So, and and you have a pretty diverse, because you came out of the athletic world, athletic training and
Yep.
mindset in that particular arena, so to speak, and it's expanded to, I mean, internationally, globally. You're dealing with people of all levels. What do you have you seen as kind of being the biggest difference in actual global culture, whether it's ethnicity driven or geographically driven, across various industries and walks of life? What's been some of the consistencies
Yeah.
that you've seen in leadership and diversities that you've seen going, oh, this, what might work in America or North America, man, that's not going to cut it in the Middle East kind of
Right.
deal.
Right. Yeah. So that's a great question. So one thing that I think is consistent is the understanding that leaders have authority. There's that's just what it is. And so everybody, no matter where you're at, now it's the application of that authority and the expectation of what the authority does that I think is different. So by that I mean what's consistent is a certain amount of respect for, if not the person, at least the position that they
Mm-hmm.
hold as a leader. And what the difference, like I said, is the application. So for example, in the Denmark and Sweden and up in that area of the world, uh, they're just so much more laid back. Uh, they while there's still the respect, there's still the authority. They're not going to come out and say the things that an American boss would say. And then in Japan, for example, they of course have a completely different culture there, where they honor the title and the position is so revered and so honored that they don't even look their employer, their supervisors in the eye and things like that. And they carry a tremendous amount of cultural honor, so to speak. And whereas in America, we don't feel that way. Our loyalties change often.
Yeah.
Who's as soon as someone offers to pay me a quarter more an hour, I'm out, kind of a thing. And you don't see those. So it's the motivation, I think, of the different countries. So there's certainly big differences there. From a 3D perspective, this is what I think is fun, to where like a Japanese culture, for example, would be highly, highly hindsight driven. And I think American culture, while statistically many of the middle management and lower are hindsight driven, executives and senior to mid-level managers and higher are very foresight driven. They're always thinking about the future, the plan, where we're going, almost to the detriment of the present. One thing that I have noticed, and in my research shows this, and all the different samples that I've taken, is insight is the least frequently practiced behavior. Now, what that tells me is a lot of people hear or know a lot about where we came from and where we need to go, but they don't focus on what's happening right here, right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's universal. I think a lot of people have a difficult time recognizing what's happening right now. How am I? And it's that, and which is why I believe, now this is kind of take us in a different direction, but it's why I believe there's an emphasis right now on mindfulness so much, is because people just aren't that aware of how their body is feeling. I mean, It's intro. So I just introspection, it's called. Like I just read a study just actually a few days ago, fascinated me, that people who have high introspection, which is your ability to sense what's going on in your body,
Hmm.
tend to be much higher performers and even live longer and more inspirational, things like that. And the example of the classic introspection study is, can I sit perfectly still, close my eyes, not touch or feel or have any external thing on, and take my heart rate, just take my own heart rate, just sitting here, just feeling my heartbeat in my chest, and how accurate am I to my heart rate, things like that, when you can feel your blood pressure starting to go up because you feel the pulsing in certain things. And people who can do that um, actually are better off a lot of times in these leadership categories, these performance categories, because they're more aware of what's actually happening right here, right now. It begins with themselves, but as soon as they begin good at that, then they pick up on other things that other people don't notice. The little nuances in conversations, and the little voice change here or the little eye roll there that sometimes we just ignore or miss altogether. And so because of that, people, they come off, I should say this way, as much more attentive. And because of that, they garner more influence.
Wow. So the 12 behaviors. So in that in insightful stage, what are the? I think you said there's four behaviors in
Yep.
each D. What are some of the behaviors of an insightful person?
One of the things that they do, sorry, I reached over here real quick. The one big behavior that they do is what's called communitarianism. And it's actually the lowest rated behavior. I shouldn't say lowest rated, the least frequently practiced of all behaviors. And that, again, has to do with insight and how we prepare and how we live in our community, for example. So, communitarianism is, how often do you give back to your community in terms of social help, political support, things like that? People tend to avoid those things. And so
Hmm.
this is why insight is one of the lower areas, is because people don't take time to pay attention to what other people are doing in a social capacity. What I and why I think that is because we live in these realms in our minds. I'm either in work mode or non-work mode, and if I've got kids or something like that, then I'll add little league mode or something like
Yeah.
that. And we're all we do is we switch from mode to mode all day long. So when I'm in work mode, I'm only thinking and drawing on work experiences, work ideas, things like that. I'm not thinking about other stuff unless I'm, daydreaming or something like that. And then job's over, switch. I got to get to my son's little league game. I'm in little league mode now, and I'm only thinking about stats and practice and this kind of thing. And then we go from mode to mode, and we forget. And this is what really is interesting to me. We forget that all of these things are related together, and we forget that we try so desperately hard to compartmentalize our lives because we think it's easier that way. I can have more control if I have a work life, a home life, a dad life, a private life, and I've got all these, a social life. I've got all these lives, and I just go from life to life, and I refuse to see how my work life affects my home life, how my home life affects my social life, etc. And actually, they're all intricately interrelated, and that's the complexity that I talk about in the book quite a bit of. Before you can practice the 3D behaviors effectively, you've got to embrace what I call 3 meta skills, or 3, some people call them maxims. And the first one is you have to learn to embrace complexity. And this is important because we talk about complexity a lot, but I really have come to be convinced that when people talk about complexity, they're not talking about complexity. They're talking about complication. And there's a big difference between being complicated and being complex. And when you talk about a complicated system, textbook is a machine. Isaac Newton actually began thinking about that and getting us in that direction. And we use phrases to reinforce we're thinking about a complicated system when we say we're a well-oiled machine, we're firing on all cylinders. We use language like that in our lives and in our professional lives as well to indicate that things are going well. But if you really stop and think about that, a complicated system is a system that's made up of many moving parts, and each of the parts are independent of each other. And at certain times, they're called to come together. And when they come together, they perform their function and they're a well-oiled machine. And then if something breaks in a complicated system, you simply remove the broken part and everything else remains unaffected and unchanged. So that's how we live our life. That's generally how we frame our thoughts. The reality, however, is that we are not a complicated system. We are a complex system. A complex system also has many moving parts. The difference is they are not independent of each other. For example, the classic example of a complicated system is a car engine, right? So you have a car engine there and you need new spark plugs. It's easy. You open the hood, you take out the spark plugs. You don't mess with anything else. Everything else remains unaffected, and they're just waiting for the spark plugs to be put in so they can do their job. So you put the new spark plugs in, everything's good. You need a new gasket, you need it, whatever it is, a new radiator hose. Everything else stays like it is, unaffected by what's being changed. So we think of our systems and our organizations and our life as a machine, but the reality is it's not complex or complicated, it's complex. So the example of a complex system would be a cake, for example. And you think about a cake. So your car engine, they've got carburetors, spark plugs, gaskets, all many moving parts, many parts. The cake also has many parts: flour, oil, butter, milk, chocolate, sugar, all that stuff. It also has many parts. But the difference is when you put those parts together, they become something different. They're in there. And whereas I could say in a complicated system, I could say, you know what? I put the wrong spark plugs in. I'm going to take them out and put the right ones in. In the complex system, you can't do that. You can't say, oh, I put the wrong eggs in. I needed those eggs for something else. I want to use these free range eggs instead. You can't go in and take the eggs back out and put new eggs in. Okay. So that's a complex system, is once those pieces are integrated together, they become part of the whole. They become inseparable. You can't reduce them down. And so that's how life really is. That's how relationships really are. That's the facet of our life. My personal life. I mean, people say I don't let my personal life affect my work life, or I don't let my work affect my life. That's stupid. Because as soon as you get fired, or as soon as you get demoted or lose your bonus, that's going to affect your personal life,
Yeah.
So those are the types of things that we spend time working out. So that's one of the meta skills you have to have. You have to learn, you have to transition in your mind out of a complicated mindset into a complexity-based mindset. When you do that, the rules change. How you interact with people change. What you notice changes. How you start to recognize that the reason why this person didn't go the way I wanted them to go wasn't because of them just being a mean person. It was because of all these other things that I may have done, and other things in their past, present, and future that they're thinking about that are different than mine. And now all of a sudden they're not just mad or a grumpy person for one reason. There's all kinds of factors that go into that. And I learned this lesson at a very young age. And I've told this story before. I tell it in the book. And one of the things, I call it the Vulcan death grip story. It's a funny story. My dad was a huge Star Trek fan, old school Star Trek fan. So one of the things we did growing up in his house was practice the Vulcan death grip on each other. I had 4 siblings, or 3 other siblings. There was 4 of us. So we're all 5 of us. My mom didn't participate, but all of us kids and my dad had this Vulcan death grip thing that we tried to do on each other. Right. And so one day I come home from school and I had a pretty standing routine that I dropped my bags at the door, went into the kitchen, got a snack, went out the back door into the backyard. And we lived in the city, so we had an alley. And I'd meet the other kids in the alley and we would play baseball or football or whatever in the alley after school. And so today I was going to do that. And I dropped my bag and my mom's there. And she said, no, you can't go out and play today because you didn't do your chores before school. And so I got an attitude with my mom. And I don't even remember what I said or what I did, but the mistake I made was not knowing that my dad was home. See, normally when I got home from school, my dad was still at work, but for whatever reason today, my dad was home and he was around the corner in the kitchen overhearing this conversation I was having with my mom. So I disrespected her, whatever I said. He come running out of the kitchen as fast as the man's ever moved and applied the Vulcan death grip immediately to my good one, Dad. You got it. You found it right away. You know, my that kind of stuff. And so he finds it and gets. But what he does though is amazing, and it absolutely changed my life. He walks me over to the wall. He's nose to nose, right? He's nose to nose with me, and he says something that I remember thinking didn't make sense. He says, "Don't you ever talk to my wife like that again." And what was amazing to me, and this is a true story, Pat, I'm thinking in my head, who's your wife? You know, because I only ever knew and related to this woman as my mom. And now he's bringing in another identity that, by the way, was a bigger and first identity than mom. And so he says that to me. And then he says, my dad was a funny guy. And he says, and if you ever talk like that to her again, we'll kill you and nobody will know you're gone because we can make another one that looks just like you. You know? But anyway, so then he says, now apologize to your mom and go do your chores, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So I did. And I remember thinking as I was doing my chores, because I was still like, that's right. My mom is his wife. I mean, I'm like, I don't know, 11 years old. I'm like, it was really mind blowing. My mom is his wife. His wife is my mom. Wow. I never thought of that before. And then I imagined if it was my grandfather who was home and the same thing happened. He would have said, don't talk to my daughter like that.
Yeah.
And if my uncle was there, he would have said, don't talk to my sister like that. All of a sudden, in a moment's time, this woman who I only had what we call a dyadic relationship with now, is I only knew her in one dimension of her identity as mom, but here she's a wife, she's a daughter, she's a sister, she's a friend, she's a lover, you know, she's all these things. And I only knew her in one of these dimensions. And that's what complexity brings in. That's the importance of understanding life's not complicated, it's complex. And we have got to realize that, and how I would like to say I became the perfect child after that. I did, of course, but it did help me see things different than I did before. It's like, because I could, for the last 10 years or whatever, however long, I could talk to my mom like that. But now all of a sudden, when I realized that my mom is also his wife, I knew I could get away with talking to his wife like that. So that changed how I interacted with her. It changed how I understood her. And of course, we laugh about it now. My dad has since passed away. My mom's still alive, and we still talk about that. And it's kind of interesting, but that's kind of the genesis of this contextual intelligence idea in the first place. Of we have to be aware of who the people are that we're addressing and talking to. They're not, and this is what I mean, but we get myopic, and this is why we have, I think, a lower level of that communitarian, because we don't like to see people outside of the space that we know them in.
Yep.
So you think about this, because this is true. When you run into a work colleague at a party or at the grocery store, it's awkward for a minute. It's kind of odd, like, because I don't have context for you as a normal person.
Yeah.
So because I don't have context for you as a normal person, I don't know what's appropriate to say, what's not to say. So what do? The first thing we know to do is we pull them into what's familiar. You start talking about work.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, or whatever that common thing you have is, because you don't recognize that Well, this person might be a husband, might be a wife, might be a father, a dog, whatever, all the other things that they
Mm-hmm.
probably are. We don't know anything about that about them. And because of that, we have a lot of opportunities to mess up the interaction.
Yeah.
And one of the things that contextually intelligent people do more frequently than others is they take time to notice those types of things. They notice that, okay, you're more than just the person in the cubicle next to me at work. You're more than just a colleague. And it does, and I'm not saying that you have to be best buddies or best friends
All
and
right.
know every intimate detail. Not at all, but a little bit about, what they do and where they are and that kind of thing, I think is important.
Yeah, man. What you just described, I think, is two words that everybody in today's society, particularly in the United States, could relate to. And you just described cancel culture.
Yeah.
That that we treat people as if they're a complication, as if they're a broken piece, and they need to be removed from our lives, or they need to be canceled. And like you said, I don't expect, a famous athlete or television movie star or whatever to have an opinion on anything other than the character that they play that made them famous, or the sport that they play that made them famous. And and if they step out of that, what I expect and accept in the way of their thinking, talking, and acting, then I'm going to cancel them, and because I'm treating them as a complication as opposed to getting to know, like you say, all the dimensions that they are, and how many, particularly amongst actors and stuff, how many actors do we now know? I call them Paul Harvey moments, the rest of the story. How much do we know about, was it Jim Caviezel? And different people that once they got canceled, then they had the freedom to go, oh, okay, now I'm gonna share who I really am, and all those dimensions about me, and then we get to know them better. And I think one of the, like, in my arena, I talk, when you hear it a lot too, not just in my arena, but a lot of people talk about servant leadership,
Right.
and they hyphenate it, and I think they're two distinct mindsets, but if you don't have the and a lot of people will call it emotional, intelligence, but I like your contextual intelligence much better. Is if you don't have that mindset, because, and this is scriptural, you'll always find more of what you're looking for. I mean, that's what the scripture is. Knock and the door will be answered. Open, seek and you shall find. Ask and you'll receive the answer. So if we have that contextual mindset of looking for the three dimensions, not only of ourselves but of other people, then we're going to have more opportunities to behave with empathy, or to behave with compassion, of putting the wants and needs of others before our own, because we're looking for that dimension. And we're not psychoanalyzing people or anything like that, but you're actually being sensitive to,
Right.
and even for yourself, it's that somebody cut you off on the highway, and you just so much want to give them that single finger wave. But
Right.
if you have this contextual intelligence, and your sense of, maybe they're having a bad day,
Right.
it brings your blood pressure down, and you just, give them the whole hand wave and say, I'm sorry, mouth it or whatever. And we never know the impact we're going to have in somebody else's life. It's
Right.
very rare that we get the Paul Harvey moments where we get to hear the rest of the story. So we should be living our lives that the rest of the story will be very positive, or as positive as possible.
Yeah. And applies to giving people the benefit of the doubt. Like you said, it's another psychological fallacy or cognitive fallacy that when I'm breaking the laws on the road and need to
Yeah.
get somewhere,
Yeah.
people, I have a good reason for it and they should understand.
Mhm.
But when they're doing it to me, it's just because they're a bad driver.
Yeah.
You know, and we have to accommodate. Listen, I do this too. We have to admit that we do. We but we don't give ourselves credit for that because when I do it, it's necessary.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's okay. But when they do it, we don't see the context you're talking about it, and that needs to apply to every space of our lives for sure.
Yeah. Well, and even like in the work world, or even in your home life, you and I were, I'm sure, raised the same way with this mindset that if you want it done right, do it yourself.
Correct.
And so when we have that mindset, we take away the ability for other people to grow and learn from their own mistakes, or we become jaded to the whole concept of delegation. And there's a fine line. This I had a lieutenant told me this. He goes, "There's a fine line between leading by example and doing somebody else's job for them." And it was in my annual evaluation, and I was a sergeant, and he goes, your best strength is you lead by example. You're not a desk jockey. You're not waiting for crap to happen or to be called. You're out there with your people, and you're making arrests and you're doing this and other things. But he goes, Pat, you don't realize you've trained your people that, hey, I don't have to do it because the sergeant's going to be out here and he'll take care of it. And that's doing somebody else's job for them. And those three dimensions and that conceptual intelligence is extremely important. To don't go down that rabbit hole or take that path that you think you're doing something positive when in reality you may be stunning somebody else's ability to grow and to show their strengths and their leadership qualities. A couple of things. I know you've talked about your books and stuff. What books or mentors or experiences that you had that most impacted? I know you shared the one with your dad, but what are some other things that have really impacted your mindset and in your three dimensions, particularly the present and the future?
Yeah. So, well, like I said, I already shared the one story, but then after a while, you got to practice what you preach. And so I've been more aware of those moments and how they have impacted me. Books. I mean, there's so many books. I'll give an example here in a minute, but let me just rattle off a few books that I think are priceless to help towards this journey. One would be Nassim Nicholas Taleb's book, Anti-Fragile. I think that's a great book. It teaches you how not to just be resilient, but to actually benefit from and get stronger from disruption and disorder. And I think that's huge. I'm a big fan of an author I started reading about a year and a half ago, Benjamin Hardy is his name. And he wrote a book, Be Your Future Self Now. So if you're struggling with the concept of foresight, that's a textbook for helping with foresight. Be Your Future Self Now by Benjamin Hardy. Great book. And then another one that also by Benjamin Hardy which in my opinion is a total help to understanding hindsight, is Personality Isn't Permanent. And that I think is a mind bender and a revolutionary idea, because we're taught in America, at least, that your personality is something you're born with. It's what you have, and it's shaped by a relatively young age. And it's just, I'm an extrovert, I'm an introvert, whatever it might be, however, find personality. And he makes, and what I believe is an indisputable argument. It's not just a good argument. He goes to the research very clearly and shows, no, we've misinterpreted this research all along. And your personality, in fact, does change, and it changes dramatically over time. And and it explains that. And I think that really helps with understanding hindsight and who I think I was based on what happened to me and how you actually have changed. And And I won't get into the research on it, but it's fascinating research. So with that, now the experiences that you've talked about, I've had some tremendous experiences, and I've been very, very blessed. And I'll mention two things. I'll do the simple one first. A big part of what has shaped who I am is my faith. I'm very sincere about my faith. I'm very passionate about my faith, and I believe that relying on and leaning into the God of the Bible, in my case, has been very profound impact on how I view and see the world, how I view what happened to me. For example, Scripture teaches that all things work for good to those that loved Him and are called according to His purpose. So you either believe that or you don't. And in my case, I believe that. So when I do have these obstacles, when I do have discouraging things, in fact, that was November of 23, I was diagnosed with advanced metastatic prostate cancer. And so, like I said, I either believe that or I don't. So I believe that in some way, somehow, this is meant for my good and to improve something somewhere, to become more aware. So when you have that mindset, it affects how I see the future. How I see my future, I see myself stronger than I am now. I see myself healthier than I am now, and things like that. And I think that's really important. Or at the very least, that my life is work to benefit and help someone else, So that's one thing. The other thing that I think is also incredibly profound is travel, international travel. And I mean that. I know people talk about that, but again, if you're talking about learning to see things through a different lens, through different perspectives, which I believe this is what 3D thinking is. And I use the example of a famous story, Ebenezer Scrooge from A Christmas Carol. And he was a rotten man and became Charles Dickens, like the last line in his book, he became the best man the town had ever known. And so how do you go from a rotten man to the best man your community has ever known? Well, he had to go through and learn 3D thinking. He had to have a ghost come and show him accurate hindsight. He had to have a ghost come and show him accurate insight, the ghosts of Christmas past, Christmas present, and Christmas yet to come. And he had to have a ghost come and show him what's going to happen in the future if he maintains his current course of action. So he needed a guided tour through the 3D thinking process. And when he began to apply that and accurately see what actually happened in the past, what is actually happening right now, and what will happen in the future, he changed. And I believe we can do the same thing. And I say that to say that I think international travel are your Christmas ghosts that show you things that you never thought or realized before that can actually help you become a better person. So,
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Having lived that a little bit, probably my wife and I's greatest experience was hiking the last 113 kilometers of the Camino de Santiago, the Way of St. James in Spain, and and I had plantar fasciitis in both feet when we were doing this, so we were on a guided tour, but I was always an hour and a half, 2 hours behind the group because I couldn't keep up the pace that they were, and the people that I met from around the world, and fortunately they spoke English because I don't speak any foreign languages. That to experience that, and even just the landscape and everything. And the culture, the food and all those things, yes, but it was the actual meeting of people,
right,
from around the world. I met a guy who was helping, and they started in Portugal, so we actually met in Santiago. They took the Portugal route, we were taking the Spain route, and he had walked 500 miles with his brother, who's completely blind, based on a traumatic brain injury, and to hear those kinds of stories where we get to realize that how small the world really is and how much alike we all are as creations of God.
Yeah.
So that's cool. I put a star by personality isn't permanent. I wrote that one down. Two of my favorite books, Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday, and then not a famous book. It's called Deliberate Discomfort by Jason Van Camp, retired Lieutenant Colonel, Special Forces, and he has 12 or 13 people tell their stories, and they're all from the military, people that he had worked with. 2 living Medal of Honor recipients tell their story of facing obstacles, facing what realistically could have been considered a tragedy. One guy actually drowned and was clinically dead. And they tell their story of that contextual intelligence and what they learned, and their past didn't define their present, and it doesn't predict your future.
That's right.
All those kinds of things. So fascinating stuff. You have Becoming Epic is one of the books, and then what's the other one?
Yep. Yeah. So Contextual Intelligence, and the second edition of that just came out in late September. So excited about that. So it's relatively still a fresh second edition. We have some updated chapters. So that's out there. Contextual Intelligence. The book that I just wrote came out on December 9th. So we're about 6 weeks into the release. It's called Becoming Epic, and then it's how excellence, perception, inspiration, and compassion become a remedy for mediocrity. And that is my book that I just wrote it, so I love it right now. It's exciting, but it came from my own journey myself. One of the things that I had to do for my cancer treatments is I had to have 40 days of radiation. And when you do radiation, it's every day, the same time, you can't miss, kind of a thing. And I had to do 40 days, which is the most they'll allow a person to do. So I was maxed out on radiation. So I had to cancel everything I was doing for 40 days. And that cost me. I had at least 3 gigs that I had scheduled in that time, and speaking engagements and things like that I had to cancel. So that was disheartening for me. But instead of feeling sorry for myself, and I would be lying if I say that I didn't for a little bit, because we all have to grieve these things when they come.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't stay that way, So at least that's what I believe. And then so I made a vow to myself, a promise to myself, that I would write 1,000 words every day for 40 days while I was on radiation. And my plan was for it to be kind of a cathartic journal,
Mm-hmm.
my feelings, my emotions, these kinds of things. And I'm like most guys, I'm probably not very good at expressing those things.
Yeah.
So after about 2 or 3 days, I'm like, this is boring, but I made a commitment. I was going to write 1,000 words every day. So I did. And I started remembering some of the things that I've always been passionate about. I had developed a model earlier on in my career of the Becoming Epic model, where excellence, perception, inspiration, and compassion. And I started just unpacking that. So that's what I wrote about every day for the next 37 days. And by the time I was done with it, I had a manuscript. I actually told my wife, I said, honey, I think I just wrote a book here, kind of thing on these things. So we, reached out to a few people, and sure enough, it went through the process and the editing, and it's on Audible. So if you don't like to read books, you can listen to it on Audible. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it in any bookstore. And it's called Becoming Epic. And I'm excited about it. And it explains each of the 4 maxims of what I believe a successful person does. They're excellent. They're perceptive. In other words, they use 3D thinking. That's really what that chapter in the book is about. They're perceptive, so they understand the past, present, and future and what's going on. They're inspired and inspiring. So not only do they live inspired, but they're living inspired encourages other people. And then they're compassionate. And this part of compassionate is really been, I'm working on another book now based off this and what I discovered, because, the example you just gave about deliberate what was it?
Yeah.
Deliberate
Discomfort.
discomfort. Yeah,
Discomfort.
deliberate discomfort. And compassion is actually, of course, two words.
Mm-hmm.
Com meaning with or alongside of, and passion, not in the American sense of something that gets you excited.
Yep.
Passion in the Latin, in the true meaning of the word is pain, misery, suffering, as in the passion of the Christ. Right.
Yep. Right.
And so
Yeah.
compassion means to walk alongside of suffering and grief and pain.
Right.
And that's what you do. So a person who is truly epic in how they live their life understands that they need to not avoid the pain that comes, but learn to walk alongside it. And not, again, I'm not saying be sadistic. I'm not saying, do stupid things on purpose, but when because life will bring that stuff to you no matter what. So when it does, don't look at it as something that's meant to destroy you. It's actually meant to make you stronger and better and wiser and smarter and all these things. And that's what an epic person does. They understand this about life. So they do those four things.
Yeah. I think John Maxwell calls that, it's not what happens to you that matters. It's what happens in you.
That's right.
And in our lifetime, particularly, from a faith perspective, St. Teresa of Calcutta, Mother Teresa, you talk about probably the most epic person in our lifetime, and how, and she had her own doubts. If you read about her life and people that were in her close inner circle that have written about her, is she had tremendous doubts about her own faith, strength and stuff. But despite all that, she kept walking that path, trusting, or I call them Job moments, that, I've always said, I don't want to be Saul, that it takes God, literally knocking me down and, being blinded to get my attention.
Right.
And then the flip side of it is, Job, God didn't do those things to Job. They were allowed to happen, and God was not testing. It was Satan was testing Job, not God. And how Job, his 3D thinking, and to put it in that kind of context, is it's and we all, it says daily, deny yourself, pick up your cross, and follow me.
Yep.
So having what you're calling those skill sets, those mindsets, will make that journey more impactful, more purposeful, and it's not going to take away obstacles and tragedies and stuff in your life, but you will certainly respond differently.
That's right.
Wow. Well, Matt, I'm telling you, man, we got to get you back on. I'd like to probably do a couple episodes of, hey, let's take just one dimension and do them at a time and talk about the behaviors, so that, we can become better, leaders in our own lives, and in the lives of other people. So thank you so much for being here. So the best way, I guess, to get a hold of you is at the Dr. MattKutz.com.
DrMattKutz.com and or MatthewKutz.com. So
okay, yeah, and doctor's not spelled out. DrMattKutz.com, and then obviously go on Amazon and check out his written works. Any last parting? I mean, if you had, I always say to people, if you had one parting thing you want to leave message, now's the time to share it.
Hey, yeah, no, I mean, I always try to tell people everywhere I go, I'm a big fan of leadership. I think leadership is underrated and over talked about, under practiced. So, I go back to Romans 12:8. If God has given you leadership ability, take the responsibility seriously.
Awesome. Matt, thank you so much. Hey, for our audience, man, we're so glad you're here today. I hope this impactful conversation has turned on some light bulbs in your own life. If you know somebody that needs to hear this message from today, absolutely share it with them. And it's because of you that we're now, as of a couple days ago, we're over 4,100 downloads in 32 countries on six continents. It's because of you, the listener, and we love you and we appreciate you and we thank you for being a part of our warrior servant leader journey. And always, always, as I sign off every episode, always strive to do the right thing at the right time, the right way, and for the right reasons, because that's what warrior servants and leaders do every day. Love you all. See you next week.
Bye.